Hello, so I'm Mark Smargon from Colu, and thanks for the introduction. I heard about Bitcoin for the first time in 2013, and I've been in that space ever since. And the first thing that we try to do with a group of partners is basically try to implement paying with Bitcoin at local stores. So this was something that we've been doing in 2013. We actually integrated Bitcoin to POS systems, and people just went into bars and sat down, and on their check-in receipt, they got a QR code, and they paid like 0.00 Bitcoins for their beer. And that was like a first attempt to try to tackle this question of will it replace fiat? Will it be comfortable enough? So a lot of questions arose. 3 years later, we're doing the same thing with Colu, very, very similar. I will tell you a bit about our experience and also a bit about like what we have learned and the test we did and why we end up doing what we're doing right now, and specifically focusing on how this technology will be mainstream. There are technical issues, there are regulatory issues, and a lot of interesting debate. So 3 years ago, when we started Colu, we asked ourselves a few questions. I think in general, the entire ecosystem were asking the same questions. There was no blockchain sector or blockchain space or blockchain hype. At that time, it was called 2.0. It was a beginning of trying to figure out what can we use this technology for other than Bitcoin. And in 2012, a new term was coined, colored coins, an idea, basically more of a very vague hack. Just let's take Bitcoin's blockchain and use it to secure other types of assets, like use it to secure physical, real-world assets, not necessarily pure digital value. And this was sort of a solution to the chicken and the egg problem that really allowed us to bypass a lot of questions. So we basically said, okay, the Bitcoin network secures billions of dollars. Let's use that hashing power to secure colored coins, basically assets that we assigned value to them by the issuer. So the issuer basically colored those coins as gold or as dollars or as a house or as a movie ticket, and basically made those digital assets have the same property that Bitcoin has. So they're not double spendable, they're transferable, there's no central authority that blocks their trading. And we said, how do we make the same thing for money? How do we, okay, so that's like a very, very initial idea. How do we turn it into a reality? And colored coins, like if I fast forward a few years forward, basically that's the concept that a lot of stuff like Ethereum and Mastercoin and Counterparty and Bitspark, there were at least like 6 different colored coins protocols to do basically the same idea. So use a blockchain network to safeguard assets issued by an issuer. So the first thing is how do we build those networks? That was the first question we asked. The second one is how do we represent real-world value on the blockchain? And another question I think was pretty much neglected at that point. We saw that most companies go and build new blockchains. We understood that there is a blockchain software stack, and building something with blockchain technology is like building like a mobile app in the 90s. You need to build your entire software stack by yourselves and pick your own protocols. And the reason that there's a lot of fragmentation in the space because we didn't see many people really trying to tackle this standards that go on top of the blockchain aspect. So that was our focus back then. So the first thing we decided to do is just take colored coins, take the concept, create a sandbox where people can go and issue digital assets without any technical barriers. So absolutely eliminated all previous knowledge needed to issue currencies. You don't need to hold Bitcoins. You don't need to know cryptography. You replaced everything with a very nice SDK that handles all your encryption and still gives you your private key, but you don't need, as a developer, you don't need to deal with the complexities of actually going and issuing digital assets. And the purpose with that was, okay, we see a lot of attention for this project, like people coming from all over the world. Let's give them a sandbox to play with, and we'll see like their problems, we'll see what they're building, we'll see what's the demand, what problems they're trying to solve. You know, people say that blockchain is a solution looking for a problem. So we try to really learn and see what people are building and where do they face the trouble. So we saw, basically the platform allows you to go inside. It says in general that you can issue a digital asset, not specific to anything. We saw people are issuing a lot of different ideas, trying to solve a lot of different problems. So people from 100 different countries went into this platform. We saw a lot of organic traction. We didn't promote it at all. It's all organically. And when we gave them generic tools, we saw that there's another problem, the fact that it's too generic. You see one project issuing a key to a door. Basically, they try to build a platform that allows you to open doors using the blockchain. So sharing a key to a door, basically using the same technology for ticketing, for instance, a secondary market for ticket trading. But the vast majority of all the use cases was specific to local currencies. And it was very clear to us that events around the world really affect the traction within that system. So we saw demonetization in India. Suddenly, a lot of people from India coming to us, we want rupees on the blockchain. The same goes for Venezuela. We saw Papua New Guinea, community banks in Brazil, remote places like New Zealand or just tiny isolated economies expressing very similar ideas without even advertising it, without even discussing it between themselves. All basically said the same. We don't have banking infrastructure, and we want to build a local equivalent of that, of Bitcoin. Basically, they looked at colored coins as a way to do that because it's based on Bitcoin technology. So that was an experiment that we did. And a lot of insights we learned from that. So first of all, scalability is the biggest pain. So the biggest blocker for adoption, and specifically for the things that they try to do, is the scalability issue that involves also the fact that colored coins used fees with Bitcoin. So as the fees went up, scalability became a problem for Bitcoin and for colored coins.
Can you say a few more words about the scalability challenges? Because I mean, it's decentralized, it's available everywhere. Do you mean the speed of processing and the cost of transaction? Where's the problem?
So first and foremost, the cost of transaction. That's the biggest pain. If you want to build a system for paying Bitcoin at a pub, then you can count on zero confirmation transactions. So in theory, you might not have a problem. For bigger transactions, you need to wait 10 minutes. So that's a scalability problem, sort of. But the biggest issue was fees. The fact that they need to, so who pays fees in that system, especially when it incorporates local currency and Bitcoin together. So you need to pay fees with Bitcoin, and you have a problem. And also, we didn't see a clear way of scaling it to, like, not times 2, but times 1,000. We didn't see a clear road to do it, and I'll talk more about scalability in a second. So the first thing is scalability. The second thing, which we felt was the biggest pain for these technologies, is the fact that nobody really looking to test it with real users, or it became sort of a niche. You know, we don't want to build a product for Bitcoin consumers. We want to build a product for mainstream consumers. And nobody was, even today in private blockchain space, you have only B2B use cases. You don't have any B2C use cases. So we understood that eventually this technology is interesting only if the end game is giving each user the private key. So that was the biggest pain, trying to solve it with real consumers. So the first thing we did is go to Florentine, which is a neighborhood, a very hipster neighborhood in Tel Aviv, trying to onboard consumers and businesses. We said that we don't have, we didn't want to wait for a bank. We didn't want to wait for a municipality. We want to start those economies from bottom up. So that's the first thing we decided to do, just onboard real users, real consumers, small businesses and people that buy at those businesses. The second thing is eliminating the learning curve. There is no other currency inside Colu's app. There is no Bitcoin. There is no learning curve. You don't need to calculate your beer price. We understood that to build the fastest, so to build the smallest learning curve, to build the easiest product to understand and use, and to build a mainstream ready product, we had to be an issuer of those currencies. And basically, we provided the backing and the convertibility, and we were the custodians of basically users' funds. In exchange, we give them a token. This token represents a shekel, 1 to 1. So the purpose was to create this closed money system, which is frictionless. So once you bought this token, you don't pay fees until you remove money from the system. So while it's circulating inside this closed economy, it's frictionless, it's free, and it's fast. And of course, each transaction is also the settlement. So for a business, for instance, it can get paid at a terminal, at a POS, and it doesn't need to pay fees and doesn't need to wait for settlement times. It can spend it already, and it just improves the money flow. So today, we have, by the way, we are operating today in Haifa, so you can download the app and test it, and in Tel Aviv, and in the UK, we're operating in London and Liverpool. So this is a bit outdated. Yeah?
Did you have to go and talk to the FCA in the UK or deal with any e-money licensing?
Yeah, so we're applying for an e-money license in UK. In Israel, it falls under the regulation for digital coupons. So it's very similar to digital coupons. So basically, it's sort of an economy in a box solution. We're trying to take local currency models that work since the 40s and even before that. Some of them are in London itself, so we're not the only local currency in London. If we're looking at other local currency schemes, most of them are based on paper. We just wanted to create a digital version of it, very, very similar to what they're doing. If you heard about the Weir franc or the Brixton pound, we wanted to create a replicable model and also one that you can install and have a greater deal of transparency. And of course, because we give a consumer wallet and a business wallet, because the business wallet is basically a mobile POS, and we address only small businesses, we basically bypass their existing POSs. So right now, it's a bit of difficult to make a transaction, but we are the only app that really focuses on small businesses, which are the biggest employer, and basically that's the majority of businesses. In Europe, for instance, 99% of the businesses are small and medium. So today we have about 1,000 merchants, 60,000 consumers. We see people starting to change a bit their consumption patterns. For instance, we see people that are loading this wallet and use it for specific purchases. For instance, their favorite pub or their favorite restaurant, sort of like a punching card. B2B transactions started organically, so businesses know that they need to pay a fine to remove money from the system, so they keep the money circulating. And we see in London, for instance, they actually made a brewery and a pub pay each other and make this sort of, starting to make this sort of chain of supply solution by really reducing a lot of friction. And we see a lot of consumer and merchant engagement. Our onboarding experience is basically, congratulations, you got 25 shekels, now go downstairs and buy something. So the user acquisition cost basically goes to giving people some money to experience the product. So now I go back to how do we implement blockchain on top of this. So we will spend the last year to try to understand how to really create a mainstream-ready product, how to create a consumer-friendly product not intended for niche markets. It's intended basically for millennials, but it's a use case that is shared by 100% of the economy in everywhere people live. They need to purchase stuff at physical stores. It's not a niche market, it's a huge market, universal, and even improving it slightly, like shaving a millisecond of your daily routine by giving a more efficient payment system. Of course, it means a great deal. So, of course, we don't want to issue all the currencies in the world and be an issuer of all the fiat. We need to understand how this plugs back into blockchain technology. So, first thing that we decided to do is not focus on Bitcoin anymore. Specifically, we try to do a zoom out. For us, what's happening right now in the Ethereum world and what's happening with smart contracts, it's a beginning of a discussion about those layers that I mentioned earlier. So a discussion about building a shared business logic layer that connects several blockchains together. So the first thing is trying to understand with colored coins, how can we apply correspondent banking to blockchain? Or in other words, how do we apply blockchain to correspondent banking? So that's a big focus of ours. So as an issuer, we know that we need to, the biggest advantage that Ethereum gives us is the ability to automatically be traded in all the exchanges in the world. So only by being compatible with a specific protocol, I can automatically be traded all over the world. So this is, for instance, a lowering of barriers in being a bank. So in Israel, for instance, we didn't have a new bank in the last 50 years. In America, the number has declined substantially. There's a lot of consolidation in banking. So opening a bank is a very expensive thing. Minimum requirement in Israel is $100 million for banking IT. I believe that this technology can reduce this number, so it can make it more accessible to smaller types of custodians. Blockchain agnostic that I mentioned before, I don't believe that in the future, so probably you wouldn't have one blockchain per asset, but you won't use one blockchain for the entire human knowledge. So already today we know that we need to be at some level interoperable between blockchains. Efficient and scalable payment infrastructure, so giving people a system where they can transact more efficiently. I'll mention it a bit more later. And no custodial risk, so the idea is not holding users' funds or not being able to manipulate them. Giving tools for regulators, which I'll elaborate in a second, and creating this network of local issuers. So remote isolated economy can suddenly issue its own IOUs and basically transact with other communities with those IOUs. And that solves a lot of problems for that economy when this infrastructure basically comes with all the banking services inside. Yeah, you can ask.
Can you elaborate what you mean by simply putting yourself on Ethereum, you can create like one or we may integrate?
Yeah, so I exaggerated a bit. If you're compatible with ERC20, you're technically compatible with any exchange that trades ERC20 tokens. So if I'm using my own protocol, or I have my API, or I have my new blockchain, and I want it to be traded, like I want to trade assets in exchanges all over the world, you need to go each exchange individually and implement your specific protocol, your specific API. The fact that we have a standard, ERC20 the biggest advantage of ERC20, I think right now, for issuers, is the ability to be traded relatively easy. So it becomes more of a business question than a technical question. Yeah, because if you're issuing something that violates certain rules, Bittrex, for instance, is American, Polonix is American, they're not trading anything that you'll give them, but technically they could. So that's my point.
And once having a local network of local issuers, what's the gateway for cash in and cash out for having those coins to be backed up by 100% reserve?
Yeah, so I think that regulating custodians that are using the blockchain should be different, and I'll mention it in a second. So the first thing I want to focus on is the user experience. So first thing we did with our product is the very first version was giving users their own private key. We knew that it wouldn't go smooth, but it was really a disaster. The idea that users want to be their own bank, I don't think it's so relevant to the mainstream. I think it's more of a Bitcoin idea. Users don't want to be their own bank, even though they want some control. So we can give them some control, and we can take back some control from the bank. So we wouldn't have events like what happened with Wells Fargo a few months ago when they took loans on behalf of millions of users. So you do want to reduce some of the control a bank has, and you do want to increase some of the control the users have. And one of the most interesting things that we tested is basically trying to figure out where's the sweet spot. So if we're giving users a way of issuing, basically a way of signing each transaction, and we're signing it also and using a 2 out of 3 multi-sig wallet, suddenly we can see a new industry evolving that all it does is doing a short KYC and restoring users' private keys in case they lost them. So I think this type of idea, those types of services will pick up pace. I know that BitGo does key recovery services, and there is a protocol that allows you to basically create a 2 out of 3 multi-sig wallet and give the third signature to a third party. And basically what you outsourced your recovering services to a third party, and it's all enforced by the network. So this is a very nice way of giving users a very pleasant onboarding experience, because the private key they have is not the only private key, so they can still potentially lose it. After a very short process of recovering, short KYC, we can give them a third key that is stored at a third party. So key recovery services could be, I think, a good solution for solving Bitcoin's user experience. I think that, as an industry, this is the biggest unsolved UX problem that Bitcoin has, and I think that Ethereum made it even worse. So it will take a lot of trial and error to fix it. So Lightning Network, in terms of user experience, is also very big news. I'm specifically very excited and very bullish on what they're doing. And I think that there are a few signs of why specifically Lightning and not all the alternative ideas. And right now scaling is a hot topic, a lot of debate and a lot of new projects. So first of all, they didn't do an ICO, so that's a good sign. For me, I don't think that scalability is Bitcoin's biggest problem. I think interoperability is the biggest problem, and Lightning Network is sort of a one-size-fits-all solution. So if you solve it for Bitcoin, you can solve it for other blockchains, and really it flattens the mechanics of all the different blockchains it deals with underneath to a very. So for me, Lightning Network is basically how to do correspondent banking on blockchain. So it's a very interesting solution, and it reduces custodial risk and does a lot of things that if people will follow the protocol, a lot of things that will be much easier in terms of user. In the last year, we created the colored coins version of Lightning, but again, Lightning will take time to build. So as I said, we did a demo of Lightning using colored coins and basically using Lightning for transferring dollars and transferring gold and transferring any type of asset that you can issue. I believe that Lightning will take some time to pick up pace and specifically integrate into smart contracts, and it just takes time. The interoperability is a huge problem for this space. So the second issue, and I think building economies from bottom up gives you one perspective. Another perspective over the last 2 years really gave us a lot of energy because we can see the benefits for regulators. We can see the benefits of central banks adopting this technology. So first of all, today banks don't have macroeconomic data in real time. For the first time, we can actually give them information about velocity of the currency, about consumptions in different areas. Macroeconomic data in real time will give banks better decision-making tools. Other than that, this technology allows central banks to do proof of reserve. So if I'm a custodian and I issue IOUs, I can't mathematically cheat the system. So the amount of currency in circulation could be mathematically proved, mathematically verified. So that's a very powerful tool, especially for compliance, for banks. Proof of solvency, that could be even a bigger evolution. So the fact that I digitized all my assets and all my liabilities as a financial institution, I can give zero knowledge proofs if I'm solvent. So I can actually give consumers a way to say, you can use me, I'm solvent, and even banks. So trustlessly, with zero knowledge proofs, this could be a huge tool and a huge improvement, especially when you try to add more banking players to the system. You want to create a more inclusive regulation. You want to lower barriers. So finally, you have a way of doing this sort of automatic compliance. So improving money flow and tax collection, the same thing. The fact that a government basically builds a network, it brings all the participants to that network, it democratizes digital services on top of that system. You can suddenly do interesting things with smart contracts. For instance, I can go and pay at a POS system. I can pay my VAT, value-added tax. I can sign my invoice and my receipt. And I can settle this transaction in the bank, all in one action, all in real time. So this is something that, the Central Bank of England actually did a study on what central bank issued currency will do to an economy. And the result was an overnight increase of 3% in GDP just by effectively cutting a lot of interest, a lot of friction in the system. So improving money flow automatically increases GDP. So again, for financial inclusion, if today my requirement to be if today's requirement of being a client of a bank is very long, I can maybe not lower it to being anonymous, but a government can come and say each person with a SIM card could have access to a digital currency that is semi-anonymous. So I know that the barrier is no longer giving your full identity. You can somehow use fiat or digital legal tender without giving your full credentials. And for financial inclusion, that's huge. And it's a way for governments to slowly move from printed money to digital currency. Of course, moving from printed money to digital currency gives another option for central banks, negative interest rates. And this is a beginning of understanding a lot of the implications for this technology. For instance, the Central Bank of Japan recently commented that they wish their banking system could allow people to send money at night. So suddenly stuff that up until today were taken for granted, suddenly people are looking at a lot of benefits that those online systems have and really see components that they wish to adopt. For instance, 24/7 trading, reducing fees for transactions. And all of this will lead to business cycle stabilizations. So the fact that the central, you can track the economy in a more efficient way, you can allocate funds in a more efficient way, you can make entire industries more transparent, of course, business cycles, and of course, supporting small businesses that prove to be more resilient to business cycles. So of course, everything connects. And I don't believe that big economies will adopt those ideas or those technologies first. I think that central banks, or at least from discussions and from comments and from what we're seeing is being explored, we're seeing central banks in Singapore and in China, in Switzerland, Estonia, America, even UK has a blockchain department. So all of them are researching this subject, but I think the lowest hanging fruit is smaller economies where you have no infrastructure. And one of the tests that we did with colored coins is in Barbados, an island of 500,000 people. They have a huge problem where central banks where basically they have no local banking, and because of a process called de-risking, banks are pulling out of the area. So that not only don't they have 50% of the island doesn't have bank accounts, trading between the islands is almost impossible because of the de-risking process. So the idea of a central bank issued currency is not that far, where you go to places that really can experiment with this technology. And this is a real company, by the way, it raised $12 million called BIT, and they're the second ever startup to raise money in the Caribbean. So that's a nice example of how to implement it and how to learn how to regulate it, and doing it with the regulator himself. So I think I'm a lot, but like just one like a few interesting thoughts. So first of all, if you're looking at Visa and you're looking at a system like Colu, and you understand a lot of the benefits. So Visa, for instance, never mind that it's a technology from the 50s, Visa basically is taking money out of the issuing bank and moving it to an acquiring bank through a series of intermediaries. And each one of those intermediaries needs to comply with a PCI DSS certification. So we're talking about a system that relies on the fact that I can take a number and move it between computers until they reach the destination, and all the intermediaries in the middle have a cut. With push payments, you have the sender, you have the receiver, and every POS in the system can verify a transaction took place. So for the first time, you can actually access the network trustlessly, verify that the transaction took place, eliminate a lot of the inefficiency, and of course, settling in real time. So I'm saying it's a new business model because suddenly POS systems will need a way to know if a transaction took place on the cloud. Today they go through existing players, and all those players really are redundant in the future that we're heading to. Another thing is giving each user his private key, and I won't talk a lot about it, but all those social economic networks that we're seeing starting picking up pace in the public blockchain space, giving each user his private key is a huge deal for solving digital identity problem for governments, and the fact that you can build a ledger that holds healthcare records and combine it with a credit score ledger and build a new product for millennials that really gives them a better experience, a better understanding, and of course, something even more radical, giving actual stake in the network to the users. All of those things are interesting when you have the correct regulation in place. That's it. Questions?